Now that we've got Mr. Littleton on the commission, Nancy and him both show up, the odds go up.
Absolutely. I was just complaining to Eric about that last night. Is it the only comments that need to be made are those that are in communication? So your neighborhood changed with the Grand Duchess next door to your Jesus. Did you have to look at that pink thing all day?
No,
Good Lord.
no, we're on the west side of the building. Both,
Yeah.
both of the other tenants have windows that are on the east side of the building. Have
I see the grocer
yeah.
pink lens. Yeah, pretty god awful.
You know, I'm all in favor of free enterprise and stuff, but there ought to be a law.
Yeah. Well, we got, I used to actually shop, her store was on Old Seward,
Right.
live out on property.
Yeah.
Especially before you start getting so. And so I got one of the private invitations to
Oh, the real thing?
show her in my ranch, and show her in the and then we went in, it's actually a crazy store.
Yeah.
So much furniture.
Yeah.
The one too that was the little girl said in there, it is big house. White and the bed has a turret, and there's a little full-size rhinestone crown embedded in the head for it. And I look at this other, I was sitting there looking at it, and I looked at this other one, and I go, that's gonna mess some shit up.
Yeah, really.
It's gonna be messed up.
Yeah.
You should get rid of that bed right now, don't buy it. Oh, I can believe it. That's the worst thing in the world you can do for a little girl.
Yeah, what we're talking about, I've never been in a place that apparently, well, she's got her niche.
She does. No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And
And you have to, and given what she's focusing on, it, from a traffic standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to be where she is.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, what
I questioned it when I saw she was building the building, and I thought, well, okay, maybe the land was cheap, or maybe this, that, I couldn't really figure it out. But then when I realized walking in there that she was really made it a furniture store now, total, I got it figured out that's what she was doing. But yeah, well, I bought lamps from her store for my house a long time ago. And I know now that I'm in retail that the markup on furniture is way more than anything else.
Oh, yeah.
Way more.
it's one of the highest things.
Absolutely. Smart.
Well, when you can routinely sell stuff at 40% off.
Right, exactly. Yeah. That's what, my
You know,
store, I realized
it's probably about 3.
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I don't mark stuff up in my store. I don't even mark it up 100%. Which,
Yeah.
stuff like that. But you think you have things at 70%? Like then I'm losing I don't mark them up in the first place because I feel like I want a reasonable price on things.
Yeah.
But I'm learning that I actually have to start doing that because people feel they're getting a good deal when you say 70% off.
Yeah.
They don't realize you've marked it up 3 times.
Right. Yeah, it's psychological.
It is. I guess I have to acknowledge that I can't change the way business is
No.
working for it.
Well, people just got used to only buying high-ticket items when they're on sale.
Yeah. Yeah. I do it.
Yeah. That's true.
Hey! Tommy.
Seen 3 items.
So,
I'm coming in the
No, it wasn't. Well, Did you think we all skipped out?
We were kind of hoping.
You were hoping. Yeah, saying, well, 6:30, nobody's here, I'm going home. I have to tell you guys something before we get started. I was listening to some tape today of a Fairbanks Assembly meeting on something in connection with my work, and while I was trying to find the agenda item, they do their stuff live like we do, and so you can get their, listen to their meeting over the internet, and they were dealing with this one zoning case, and it was kind of like a mini area-wide zone, and the issue was, in this one area was chickens. Chickens.
Chapter 5.
Chickens, and now you know what? I was so proud of them. They dealt with chickens in a much more sophisticated way than we did. They distinguished, this was the Fairbanks Assembly, they distinguished between chickens and roosters.
Yeah, I wasn't simply.
Yes,
In
yeah.
my neighborhood,
Yeah, and, because, you know, they didn't want to, some people were really sensitive to the
How the heck do I
chickens.
get out of this?
And, but they wanted to banish the roosters.
You know, I lived in a little town in Ecuador for a little while. They even in the town, most people had chickens in their yards, but there was a part of town where they had all the roosters. They just kept the roosters and went on leashes. You could walk by and pick out what rooster you wanted to borrow for a little while. But and I don't know if that was, a zoning regulation.
What rooster you wanted to borrow.
Practice.
I love it. Well, they were talking chickens and roosters, and I just had to smile as I was listening to that. I thought, some things are just like home. Okay. There's never enough room. Oh. And I think Mr. Wang made it. You must have worked really fast. Things worked out. Well, I'm so happy. Oh. One, two, three, four, five. We have 5 of us. Mr. Isham and Mr. Josephson. Mr. Isham and Mr. Earnhardt are not going to be here tonight. And I don't know of anybody else.
Printed out 2 more pages. Great, I know.
I'm missing agenda.
Mr. John Middleton lazy farm. Yes, you get
You know what's coming, do you?
You're missing this, and that's
I got unions. Is there somebody here too?
I'd never get out of work.
Well, I have priority. I can walk. My kids now.
We've always started, we used to start at 6 one time ago, but we've never started at 5:30 unless we have a work session.
Me, well,
It makes it a little hard for the public to get here at 5:30.
I got a holiday.
That's true.
I have thought about it.
You know what? I wonder if the ones for 080 came in a separate email and I didn't get it or didn't pay attention to.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Erica? Oh,
These are the back 2 pages. Okay. If you weren't ready when I emailed.
well, that's okay. Miss McConnell, where are you?
Back 2 pages from my comments.
She's gone.
Back 2 pages.
Mr. Davis, before we get started, do you know if we're dealing with 080 tonight? I don't have anything. That's the landscaping?
I don't believe that we are. We're still focusing on
Okay.
060 and most of the...
What I had heard is that that was going to be sent later, and I just didn't know if I had overlooked something.
I don't believe it has.
Okay. Every now and then I get to deleting a string of emails and something inadvertently gets deleted. Let me get logged in and we'll get started. Okay, where if I can find you? There I am. Okay. Well, it is after 6:30, so we better get started. I will call the September 15, 2008 meeting of the Anchorage Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Will the secretary call the roll, please?
Josephson?
Here.
Isham? Phelps?
Here.
Here.
Littleton?
Here.
Keys?
Here.
Lang?
Present.
Donovan?
Here.
Earnhardt?
We have a quorum. We have no minutes. Under special order of business, I'm going to ask Mr. Wang to handle disclosures. I didn't even ask you.
Wow. Ms. Pease, do you have anything to disclose?
No. I don't.
Mr. Frederick?
No.
Mr. Josephson?
No.
Mr. Weddleton?
No.
Mr. Phelps?
No.
Ms. Jones?
No.
And I have nothing.
Okay, and we have nothing on our consent agenda. Under unfinished business, we have, for consideration and action tonight, a portion of 2107. We have before us 2107, 060, 070, and 090, I believe. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, that is correct. You were also handed out a number of papers tonight, which included the agenda. Hold items from sections 010, 020, 030, 040, 050, and 140, basically hold items from last meeting.
And are you expecting us to take action on those tonight?
I'd say it's up to you. What I did was provided the original issue response item for those items that you didn't take action on last time, and then at the bottom, in a different color and in italics, in blue and in italics, I added any additional response. So few of them are very long, so it seemed like something that you could read now and discuss, but if you're not comfortable doing that, that's fine.
Okay, I'll let the body decide what they want to do.
And then we also handed out comments we received from Commissioners Pease and Weddleton on sections 060, 060, 070, and 090.
Okay. What is the will of the group as to how we proceed?
Can we go through the September 15th memorandum and deal with that?
Yes.
And then we could deal with the other issues that Ms. Peace has identified here, if they pertain.
To go through the hold items first?
Yeah, the hold items. I thought we were going to go through the hold items first, as I recall in the conversation previously.
Okay. I actually don't remember if we said we were going to go through those first, but that's fine with me. Do we want to just go in our regular meeting capacity, or do we want to do it?
I think we should do it as a committee of the whole.
Okay, then it would be nice to have a motion.
I make a motion to have the commission operator function as a committee of the whole for the review of this memorandum.
Okay, Ms. Pease?
Madam Chair, if Commissioner Phelps is referring to the information that was just handed to us, I would prefer to have an at ease to read it, or at least to do it at the end of the program. I'm not, we haven't seen it for a couple of weeks. My mind's fresh with the parking and other requirements, and I like to read final wording kind of by concentrating on it, and I'm not sure I can do that as we go.
That's fine.
Okay,
Not a problem with that.
so you'd withdraw your motion?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay. Mr. Frederick?
Since he withdrew his motion, I have nothing to say.
Okay. All right. So with regard to the main issues that are on our agenda tonight, do we want to approach this as a committee of the whole, going through and identifying items we can reach agreement on, and then going back and dealing with those where there are either amendments or disagreement?
Madam Chair, on a point of order, has there been a public hearing on this particular item?
Yes, our public hearing is closed, as I recall. Isn't that correct, Ms. McConnell?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's correct. Public hearings were held during 3 nights in November. I believe it was a Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday.
We've concluded all of our public hearings on Title 21, I think.
I don't think I participated in all these public hearings. This does not look familiar to me.
Okay?
So I think I should abstain from the discussion of this aspect.
Okay. And you didn't listen to the tapes or review the materials from
No,
those
I just
meetings?
got back from Lower 48 late last night.
Okay. Is there anyone else similarly afflicted?
Well, Madam Chair, I recall that, and it's amazing, my memory isn't always this good, so I don't want my colleagues to think it is, but I think there was a meeting on October 5th, and I remember that because I had to go to a fundraiser for an organization. And I think the meeting was in Spenard. I definitely didn't go. Now, whether that was Chapter 7, I don't know.
No, we had some bunnies and things there.
That was the chickens and the bunnies.
Yeah, so it's
Okay.
Chapter 5.
Yeah.
I mean, there may, I don't, frankly, even if I did attend them, I'm not sure that I would recall what I heard from the public 11 months ago with any great detail. But I'm just saying, I made my best effort to attend those hearings.
Madam Chair, I would just offer that, I don't know what others feel, but staff has done a really good job of pulling out the issues from written testimony, and I believe from the oral testimony, and encapsulating them here. So even if you didn't hear the verbatim in-person testimony, which is always valuable, I think you could read staff's issue response and be pretty confident that they captured the substance of testimony from the public. I'm confident, and Erica's very thorough. I've given a lot of written comments, and she doesn't miss any of the points in my comments. So I would just offer that reassurance that if you did miss hearings, it's unfortunate. You may feel you could participate anyway.
I would concur. This is a little different because we do have the benefit of the issue response summaries where we don't in traditional cases. Mr. Phelps, have you had an opportunity to read through this new material since you just got back last night?
I started to read it, frankly. I've not finished it all. I probably got through the first 5 or 6 pages.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Before we begin, there's one other document that I don't think was mentioned by staff, and if they could just describe it's self-explanatory. It's a draft, sort of in final form, of 210703, private open space. I assume this is the latest version.
Through the chair, Mr. Josephson, and I apologize for not mentioning that, that was one of the hold issues that was left from the last meeting.
Okay.
And since I had provided it at the last meeting as a separate document, and the commission had discussed changes. I just made the changes in that document, and one of the hold issues in the memo references an attachment, which is that. But, sorry, I didn't mention it before.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Phelps, is it your desire to stay and participate, or do you feel that you would be more comfortable not participating?
Well, I guess the easy answer is to not participate, but if the commission is willing to do this, I will try and read this as rapidly as I can, and I will then enter into the discussion when I get through reading it, I suppose.
Or maybe you can just go along with us with the issues. Okay. Now, are there any other preliminary questions before we get started? Is it the desire of the commission to handle this in the functioning as a committee of the whole? Ms. Pease, I see you're in the queue. Are you wanting to offer comments, or did you already do that?
I did.
Mr. Josephson, did you already offer your comments?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I need someone to make a motion as to how we're going to proceed.
Madam Chair, I move that we convene a committee of the whole and discuss the issue response summary.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any objection? Hearing none, we are now functioning as the committee of the whole. And I see you're back in the queue, Ms. Pease.
Well, I don't know how that happened.
Well, I don't either, because I erased you and then you popped back up.
But since I am, Madam Chair, I would propose that we proceed similarly to previous discussions, and we ask members to identify issues which they want to discuss for possible amendment or clarification. This does pose a little bit of a handicap for Mr. Phelps if he's trying to read through this for the first time. So that's what I propose to do, and see what others think.
Well, perhaps you could start with the ones you've identified.
All right.
That you would like to, have clarification or offer amendments on, and just identify them by number, and I'll go ahead and just put your initials by them here on the list.
Okay. 1, 2, 5, 6, 9, 10.
Okay.
15, 16, and 17.
9, 10.
21, 22.
Just a second. 17, 21, and 22.
32, 34.
Just a second. I can't turn the pages as fast as you can talk. Okay.
43.
Okay.
45. 46 and 47.
Okay.
49. 51. 52.
Okay.
57. 59. 62. 67. 71. And 74.
71 and 74. Okay. All right, Mr. Weddleton, you're not in the queue, but I'm going to call on you next to identify yours.
Okay,
by
I was
number.
hoping for more overlap. We overlapped in about 423.
And let me get to the 20s. Okay.
28, 29,
Okay,
57.
28, 29, 57.
I may overlap a bit.
Okay, just a second. That was 57?
Right.
Okay.
59. 63. 66. 71. And then I have a few comments on sections that weren't in the issue response that I can hit. And I have a handout, too.
Okay, and when we get done with what's in this, we'll turn to those. Don't let me forget. Okay, anybody else have particular issues that they will have questions or perhaps proposed amendments to? If so, I need to see your little name in the queue. And I'll just give you a few minutes to go back through your notes. And Mr. Phelps, I'll give you until the end of when we get done addressing the ones that other folks are going to identify. I'm going to read off the ones that I have so far, and let me know, both Ms. Pease and Mr. Weddleton, if I've missed any of yours. I'll start when, are these yours? Okay. Great. And make sure staff gets a copy too, John. All right. Nancy's that she has identified are 1, 2, 5, 6, 9, 15,
10.
10. Okay. 15, 16, 17, 21, 22, 23, 28, 28 and 29, 32, 34, because those are John Weddleton's. I'm doing them one person at a time here. 43, 45, 46, 47, 49, 51, 52, 57, 62.
Yep, 59.
59. Did I skip? I have that marked. I just didn't say it with them out loud. 62. 67. And 71 and 74. Is that all of yours?
Yes, I had one item that wasn't tied to the issue response. It was just some wording that I found awkward, so I don't know whether...
At the end of your going through yours, you can bring that up, just like Mr. Weddleton will. And now, Mr. Weddleton, I'm going to read the ones you identified to see if I missed any. (23), 28, 29,
Madam Chair, just for clarity, 29 isn't on his new handout.
Well, those might be extra things.
Okay.
Oh, actually, that's right, the handout, we could skip 29, take that off. I just had words of support, we don't need to spend time on it.
57, 59, 63, 66, 71. Did I forget anything?
No, that's it.
Okay. Anyone else? All right. Where did Mr. Phelps go? Oh, he's reading. Had you identified anything yet, Mr. Phelps? No. Okay. Let's go through and see if we can resolve some of these that have been identified so far. Ms. Pease, number 1.
Yes, unfortunately, that's not a quick one. This question was about cumulative traffic impacts and how to apportion them so that the project doesn't put the road system over level of service F. And I didn't really feel that this issue was answered. So I kind of wanted to just raise a case in point. We had Legacy Point or other southeast hillside developments that they all affect the same major arterials or collectors, but we've seen that the project doesn't require participation in all the upgrades that would be necessary. They can cause, so I guess I didn't really feel it was answered, and maybe Erica can speak to that.
Thank you. What the documents actually say, I mean, the traffic impact analysis policy by the traffic department says that the traffic impact analysis is supposed to determine the traffic impacts of the proposed development and have mitigation measures to maintain the pre-development level of service. So it's possible many of you are more familiar with this than I am, but I think streets have a level of service usually A through F, A being really good to drive on and F being extremely congested. And so when a development that needs a TIA, and there are thresholds for requiring a TIA, when a development is going to reduce the level of service, they have to do mitigation measures to maintain that. Now, whether or not that always happens, I don't know, but that's what the documents say is supposed to happen. So if there's a good level of service on a roadway and a development comes in and is going to add a lot of traffic, you know, they're supposed to do mitigation measures to kind of contribute their fair share to handling that traffic. That's about all I can say.
Is that the case even when it's a collector street or greater?
I believe so.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Is that policy consistent across all classifications of roads, like if it's the street being impacted is a collector street or maybe a minor arterial?
Actually, it's the type of, it's magnitude of the development that triggers a TIA. For instance, if residential development that has more than 140 dwelling units is proposed, that kicks in. That's the threshold, 140 units, that kicks in a TIA. I don't recall what the gross square footage of retail is, but there's also a threshold for when retail proposal exceeds a certain number of gross square feet, it automatically kicks in a TIA. But,
Mr. Nelson, the mitigation measures can can be on a collector or on an arterial or a local street, that doesn't matter.
On any. It all depends upon its location and the impact to the street system. Yeah.
Okay. Did that,
Well, I guess I don't see any easy way to handle it, so I suppose we'll move on. But I guess I would note for the record that we don't have an effective system, and I don't know what other jurisdictions do. But I'll just use Rabbit Creek Road because I'm familiar with that. It's got a lot of traffic now, and there are a couple thousand more acres still to be developed. And there's no system to help to require the developers to contribute to all the upgrades that are required downstream from it. It's got a lot of driveways onto it, and you can't make left turns out of driveways anymore after a certain point. But the developers upstream don't have to. There's nothing that, as each large development comes online, extracts from them some participation in the mitigation. There's just I don't know whether other jurisdictions of our size have development fees that let a large developer contribute. So I'm uncomfortable with this piece missing from our code revision, and I guess I would just ask for the record if Erica could speak to that from your research. If you're putting in another jurisdiction of 250,000 people, at 100 or a 100 acre or 100 unit development, do you pay for the downstream impacts?
Well, as Mr. Nelson said, a TIA is not triggered until you get to 140 units. So if you're putting, when developments are coming in 10 units at a time, 10, 15, 30, 50, they're not required to do a TIA. And as it's generally by right development, it seems that during each individual development, these broader impacts to the to the system of roads that get people in this particular example, off the hillside and onto, the roads that lead them into employment areas, that's not really being looked at development by development. Now, perhaps people who are more familiar with the Hillside District Plan can.
Well, I don't know about that, but what I could add is that, kind of put it in perspective, numbers-wise. Our official streets and highways plan is based on a functional classification, and the key word there is how the roads actually function. But there are general guidelines as far as what maximum number of trips that the roads by its classifications are typically designed for. And residential collectors, typically the maximum design can be anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 trips per day, is what for a residential collector. If you have 140 units in round numbers, that's roughly 10 per unit, so there's 1,400 trips. That could consume, 20-25% of a collector capacity, or anywhere from probably 12 to 20% of a collector's capacity, and that's why it would require a TIA. Rabbit Creek Road is not I believe Rabbit Creek Road may be a minor arterial, so it's designed for a much greater capacity, higher capacity. That's not to say that there aren't problems, particularly where you have driveways directly accessing the lower end of Rabbit Creek Road, but it's hard to justify small subdivision developments having to make some kind of a contribution to Rabbit Creek Road, especially if it's not directly associated with it. And so traffic engineering has basically set a cutoff relative to residential development, has set a threshold at 140 that automatically requires a TIA be done to determine what its impacts and possible mitigation would be required with it. Beyond that, it's hard to say what we could actually codify as far as establishing some kind of a requirement or a threshold for when a subdivision developer or a residential developer would be required to make off-site impact or off-site mitigation on the road system.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Over here. May I ask the staff some follow-up questions on this?
Yes.
Okay. From Mr. Nelson, I think what I hear you saying is that, and Ms. McConnell, is that at some point the cumulative effect of developments with fewer than 140 units could result in an overhaul of the entire local transportation plan. I mean, it could be that you could have so much infill and development that you need trams and you need who knows what else. And there's no system to catch that other than to catch the impact of these smaller developments?
That's correct.
Not at the present time.
It is. It's very, very difficult.
And what section is it that requires, is it part of Title 21 that says 140 units is the threshold on TIAs?
No, that comes from the traffic department and the traffic engineer. It's not codified.
It's one of their policies.
That's correct.
Just one
if I could just say one other thing. There are communities that do have impact fees, and those impact fees can be used for any wide variety of infrastructure improvements, to include roads. But that's something that we are not pursuing at this point in time. There's a lot more analysis that has to go into impact fees. And one of the things that's coming up later here is a discussion on whether or not there should be a public open space dedication requirement or a fee in lieu of that, which is basically a dedicated impact fee. But, they have been used in lower 48, certain lower 48 communities for a whole range of infrastructure improvements from basically fire services to parks, schools, as well as transportation improvements.
Okay. I guess my last comment would be
Okay.
I know we need to move along because we can't sustain
We're on one of 70-some.
I mean, I think what Commissioner Pease must be focusing on is 2107-060A, the clause that says mitigate the traffic impacts of new development in that purpose paragraph. And I assume that there's language like this in the comprehensive plan, and it may be more sort of spirit language rather than something more concrete. But anyway.
Wow.
There are larger transportation planning efforts, like updates to the official streets and highways plan and the long-range transportation plan. Those are, they happen every couple of years, but I think as they're looking at, what streets need to be collectors and arterials, they're looking at potential build-out of certain areas.
Well, Mr. Frederick, I acknowledge you being in the queue, and I'm going to call on you in just a second. But one thing I want to remind everyone about is that we have current policies that the traffic department has, and that's exactly what they are policies, that the ordinances, whatever is adopted by the Assembly as these changes to Title 21 and the ordinances, that is what's going to drive any changes to policies, and ordinances always, the code always is superior to policies, and policies can be changed much easier than the code, provided it's in keeping with the code and the comprehensive plan. So just bear that in mind. I wouldn't get too tied up with what the current policy is in the traffic department, because we get a new administration, we get a new traffic engineer, maybe, I don't know if we would or not, and the policies could shift. But the code, look how many years we've been working on this. I don't think that anybody's going to want to go back and tackle it again for another 10 to 20 years. Once we finally get done. Mr. Frederick, you've been very patient.
Thank you. Mr. Nelson made my point about impact fees, and it's clear that large developments can impact much more than traffic. Schools, emergency services, public transportation, a whole broad array of public open space requirements. And it's a place that we haven't gone to yet, and beyond, I think way beyond the scope of this section of Title 21. So. That's all I have to say.
Go ahead, Ms. Pease.
Yes, I don't have any modifications to make to issue one.
I'll just put an X through that. Next is number 2, and it has your name by it.
Yes, and following up on your comment that ordinance can change existing policy.
Or guide it, certainly.
Or guide it. I would like to ask if traffic noise is a common element of traffic TIAs in other jurisdictions, and if that answer isn't known, or, well, let me ask that.
I don't know.
Okay. I wish I had a yes to that, because I would like it to be a factor of TIAs. Where the code's written, it's got to be a pretty big issue to, there has to be a pretty big issue to require a TIA. Substantial increase in traffic and a level of service change, 140 units. So I think there's, 1,400 trips, there's going to be some noise impact. And I would like to propose the commission add a noise requirement to the TIA.
Is there any objection to that proposal?
Well, I'm not sure what would that requirement be?
To consider it.
In the paragraph C1 on page 34, there's a list of what must be analyzed in a TIA, the following factors. And I would add to that list of factors noise impacts on adjoining uses. And I would, leave it to staff, since I'm not an expert on it, to figure out whether that's peak noise or midnight noise or indoor noise or outdoor noise. It would depend on the adjoining uses.
Is there any comparison, any standard, any basis for that in any other jurisdiction, or are we inventing the wheel here?
I don't know.
Then I don't think we ought to go there until we know something about it.
Well, Ms. Pease, perhaps since it looks like there's some concern about it, maybe we could put that on a hold list. I know on the state roads, noise must be a concern because they spend a lot of money putting up noise barriers to protect the houses and businesses along arterials. And so at some point, they must consider noise on certain types of roads. So perhaps we should put that on hold, and maybe the traffic department or we can get that. If we have to go to the Federal Highway Administration to get that information, I don't think we always have to rely on our own traffic department. We just need to get it from some experts. Mr. Frederick, you're still in the queue. Sorry,
didn't mean to be.
Oh, that's okay. Ms. McConnell?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out that, as I noted in the issue response, that we can address noise issues through the neighborhood protection section in 070, and that enables us to address noise not necessarily tied to a TIA. I mean, even for developments that don't end up requiring a TIA. So, but we'd be happy to look into that further.
Understood. Okay, Mr.
May I, Madam Chair?
Well, you need to get in the queue because I've got others here. Technically, Ms. P. still has the floor, but I'm going to acknowledge you, Mr. Weddleton, for a minute.
Okay, well, I'd support that we look at noise there. I mean, we saw doing the gravel pit that was a big issue, and I know in Northern Lights there's any number of places that traffic noise is a big issue, and I mean, it is part of the state plans when they do roads. So are we adding in this comment?
No, I had a sense that Mr. Frederick didn't say he objected to it, but I had a sense that he had a concern about it.
I absolutely object to it unless we know there's a standard
Right,
and
so
some
that's why I suggest,
basis, some objective basis for it.
Perhaps we hold it until we can get more information. And Ms. Pease has not spoken to that yet. That was just a suggestion since there was objection. Was objection at that level, because we're functioning right now as a committee of the whole. Mr. Josephson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess for Ms. McConnell, one concern I have, and I don't have this as much with your reference to the neighborhood protection section, because that's in Title 21, and so I'm comfortable the Planning Department is on top of that. But, for example, some of the time when we've heard any petitioner say, well, the noise ordinance impacts that, and so it's covered, I have some concerns that the Planning Department may not view that as within its bailiwick in some way, and that it's some other department, the Health and Social Services Department, and that it's not as comfortable sort of reaching in to some other title. Is there any reason, and I guess I mention that because my only editorial comment on number 2 was, why not double up, ? Which is my way of saying, even though I know we want to keep this language in discrete areas, sometimes it seems like it makes sense to spread it around and say that we're concerned about noise in many places.
The noise ordinance is I think it's in Title 15, which is an ordinance that's kind of in the bailiwick of the Health Department. And it's been the Planning Department's kind of philosophy to try not to just depend on that when we can identify situations where there's a high likelihood of potential impacts, to try to use other methods to prevent those impacts ahead of time, rather than leaving it to a situation where somebody has to then make a complaint and there has to be some whole resolution process through the noise ordinance. In this particular situation, I think that the neighborhood protection section gives a lot of leeway in how noise might be addressed. So we aren't trying to just depend on the noise ordinance.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Phelps, were you intending to be in the queue? I saw you raising your hand, and I didn't know if you're...
Yeah, I was going to just make a mention about the requirement for a noise evaluation as part of the TIA. Typically, it's not done because it's outside the area of the expertise of a traffic engineer. There are different methodologies that are involved altogether, and they don't use those methodologies. And so you'd have to use a different technique.
So they don't take it into consideration?
No, because the methodology is not there. At least it hasn't been in the past.
That's unfortunate. Ms. Pease, what would you like to do?
I would like to put a hold on this and find out if there – I don't want to reinvent the wheel, and I originally had thought we should hold it if we didn't know what other jurisdictions do. So I'd like to hold it and find out what we can do through the TIA process. I did look at the neighborhood protection requirements, and it talks about locating things on sites to minimize noise. It doesn't really look as if it's tailored to talk about traffic noise from roadways. So I would like to see what we can do in this section, which spells out the elements of a TIA. So I'd like to hold it and ask staff to give us some examples of what we could do.
Okay. Number 5 is the next one on the list, and this is yours again, Ms. Pease.
Yes. Number 5 is talking about the purpose right here on page 34. And the issues response talked a little bit about the why arterials need to be freed up. There are a couple changes that I'd propose here, and I've got the language on first page of my comments. I would like to add to this first paragraph the main purpose statement, supporting the pattern of designated land uses. We have this mantra, not mantra, but we constantly say that land use and transportation planning need to go hand in hand. Well, here's another place to remember that. So I'd like to add the word support the pattern of designated land uses. I'm troubled by the language free up arterial capacity to better serve regional long-distance needs, because that could be interpreted as supporting commuting over the more local in-town and cross-town traffic or transportation. And our comp plan specifically rejected this satellite pattern of development with building to support outlying communities and the Mat-Su as our future growth areas. The first part says transportation within the municipality, and I know that the municipality does go from Girdwood to Eagle River, but I wondered if it might be what we're trying to do with arterials is facilitate cross-town travel. So I offered that substitute. And the final part of this paragraph is, again, sort of the language which establishes a purpose of balancing large volumes of traffic and connectivity. So I don't know if you want us to take them one at a time. I kind of...
Okay, I see Mr. Nelson in the queue. Mr. Nelson?
Yes, if I could just comment on the issue of inserting neighborhoods between serve and regional. Neighborhoods are best served by the collector street network and not the arterial. The reason that we put the word in to free up arterial capacity to better serve regional long-distance travel needs is because of the fact that we do not have a well-connected traffic system right now. So we end up having to utilize our arterials, most of our arterials, to serve local traffic serving needs. And what we're trying to recommend here is developing a traffic network of better connectivity within our collector network, building a better collector network so we don't have to rely on the arterials to serve the local serving traffic needs, and instead have the arterials function better for what they're intended for, which is to handle through traffic.
I think that's pretty clearer than it's stated here. So I don't know if we could capture that. What you just said, if I could paraphrase, is to build a better functioning collector network so that arterials can serve through traffic more efficiently. And to me, that's clearer than serving regional long-distance travel needs.
One of the problems that we have is we're having to go back and retrofit. A lot of our minor arterials in particular function as collector streets because that's the way our neighborhoods were built. And at the time that those roads were built, they did indeed were like collectors. And now that our town's gotten bigger and grown up, and roads have changed in classification, those fixed development patterns haven't changed. And there's a lot of driveways and curb cuts still out onto some of those arterials. And we're trying to go back and kind of retrofit them, but you can't go into subdivisions and re-subdivide, and put a new collector system in sometimes. Did you have further comments, Mr. Nelson? No. Okay, what would you like to do here, Ms. Pease? I think we need to deal with these one at a time.
All right. I would like to propose adding the reference, support the pattern of designated land uses into the statement of purpose. On line 19, or let's see, line 18.
Okay, and that's on page 30.
Page 34, section A, the statement of purpose.
On line 18.
Just to insert it between the other listed purposes.
Okay, is everyone following along? Okay. Is there any objection to that change? All right. I don't hear any. Ms. McConnell, I see you in the queue. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I wanted to make a comment on the next item.
The one that's going to come up after this?
Yes.
Okay. All right. You want to take the next one, Ms. Pease?
Yes, I would propose, after hearing from Mr. Nelson, to replace that last phrase, free up arterial capacity, with these words: improve the efficiency of the collector system, semicolon, and design arterials consistent with land use patterns to facilitate crosstown travel. So I think that captures a little bit of what he wanted and also what I proposed.
Okay. Will that work for staff?
I don't think design arterial works, because this is a section about creating connectivity, particularly within neighborhoods, that isn't really about the design of our arterial streets. It's trying to, the deleted language, or the proposed to be deleted language, is about freeing up arterial capacity on our existing streets. So the word design doesn't really work with what the section is about.
Is there another verb besides free up or utilize, that very fuzzy, squishy word?
You know, it sounds like you're working away from the phrase "complete the grid." Isn't that what you mean here?
That's really right.
I hate
We want
that
to
phrase,
develop
though.
a better grid of local and collector streets to free up the capacity on our arterials to serve the through traffic is essentially what we're trying to promote. And what Erica was saying is that Title 21 doesn't get into the design of arterials, but it can get into the design of local streets and residential collectors, particularly when they're part of, either through a TIA, they're impacting on new developments, impacting on that, or when you're designing a subdivision, you want to make sure that you have a street system that connects to adjoining subdivisions, adjoining land areas, so you build in this connectivity. And by doing that, you provide better distribution of traffic flow, and you don't have to always go out onto the arterials for your trips. That's the idea, to free up the arterials for the through traffic, because if you have a good network of lesser streets, then the local trips will occur on those lesser streets.
Okay. Did you have a further question, Mr. Weddleton?
Well, maybe we could kind of get both in there. Is just leave the current wording, but before free up is say create road and trail connectivity to free up arterial capacity. I think that keeps the same meaning, but it kind of adds, it makes it a little more clear what they're driving at.
Would that work for you, Ms. Pease?
I would like to remove the words regional long-distance travel needs, so it doesn't quite get to it. If we said improve the connectivity and efficiency of the collector system, is that kind of what Mr. Weddleton said?
Create road and trail connectivity to free up arterial capacity, period, or comma, and scratch the rest. And the rest is implied anyway, because that's what an arterial does, so you could delete the to better serve regional long-distance needs.
That's fine.
I could go with that.
Did you get that, Madam Secretary? How about you, Ms. McConnell?
No, but I'm sure I can get it from the minutes.
We are so grateful for our secretary. Okay, so that takes care of number 5, or did you have one more thing in there, Ms. Pease?
Yes, the last proposal would be to just give a little more acknowledgement that we need to have connectivity across our main traffic corridors, so we don't have people running across the Seward Highway as we do now. So I would like to propose adding those other words as purpose statements, which are in high-volume traffic corridors, incorporate transit options, maintain an adequate degree of crossing for local circulation, and minimize road and traffic impacts on adjoining uses.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Ms. McConnell?
Well, we don't object at all to the concept. The section itself does not fulfill some of those purposes. It doesn't incorporate transit options, and that primarily, and I think we're going to be discussing more whether it discusses crossings. So I feel a hesitation in adding language to the purpose statement that is not actually fulfilled by the standards of the section.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton, and then Mr. Josephson.
I'm sorry, I think I already spoke.
Okay, Mr. Josephson?
Well, I guess the reason I'm not sure I agree with Ms. McConnell, who I find immensely talented and very capable, not that I had to say that, but the purpose section under 2107060, there are other purpose sections in here, but for example, the next purpose section talks about street connectivity, and that seems to be what Commissioner Pease is talking about. So I don't really know why the more general capital A purpose section couldn't talk about that.
I just think we shouldn't be mentioning increasing transit because the planning department doesn't control transit, Title 21 doesn't control transit, it's a different department. We hope to make a system that where transit can be efficient, but through Title 21, we will not be increasing transit or incorporating transit options. I mean, maybe we could revise it in some way to say, create better opportunities for transit.
Yeah, if I may, through the Chair. But you're right, this section doesn't address, land uses are what increase better transit, and transit stops weren't really addressed here. How about if we strike out the increased transit options and allow you to massage the language, but put in the purpose, the rest of this purpose statement, which is in high-volume traffic corridors, maintain an adequate degree of crossings for local circulation and minimize road and traffic impacts on adjoining uses.
Well, I'd say not so fast, if I could. And actually, looking at this section, it does talk about transit. There's, when you talk about parking requirements, you can have significant decreases in parking requirements if you're along a transit corridor. There's also talk about decreasing parking requirements if you let them build a bus stop in there.
That's not this section.
Not this section?
No, that's in Section 090, the parking section.
Chapter 7.
I'm sorry?
Chapter 7.
That is true.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Is there any disagreement? I don't. Yes? Okay, we have disagreement. So,
Is that on 3?
We're going to have to hold that one. That would be 5, I'll call it 5C. Are you objecting to all of 5?
Just the last portion that staff indicated they objected to.
If I could just clarify, we deleted the language that the incorporate transit options that we objected to. Ms. Pease suggested deleting that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Are you still?
I withdraw my objection.
Okay, so there's no objection now? Going once, twice, 3 times, there are no objections, okay? Ms. Pease, number 6.
Okay, I'll try and pick up the pace here. I think we can do
Good.
that.
I'm looking
I heard
doubtful that we're going to get done tonight.
We will. Those first ones were the big philosophies, I think. The next one, issue 6, which is on page 35, line 18, and I'm following along on the comments that I typed up. The staff has listed traffic mitigation measures, and one I would like to add to the list is phasing of the proposed development to coincide with and not outpace the necessary upgrades to off-site infrastructure. And I will raised the example of Legacy Point, which we, Commission approved within the year, I guess, where the collector, which was supposed to be helpful to off-site impacts, wasn't going to be opened until 10 years into the project at phase, 6 or 7 of the 10-phase project. So it's not a perfect illustration, but I think it is a useful tool for mitigating traffic.
Reaction from staff?
I guess I'm not sure how practical this would be for a traffic engineer to recommend. Speaking to the Legacy Point project, it was the planning staff analysis of the standards that had to be met in the site plan that led to a reduction in the number of units. But it was based upon a comparison of the number of trips from that development to the number of trips of comparable residential development that was determined to be compatible with the surrounding area. And so, yes, they did reduce it. The project was reduced in order to meet that particular standard, but it wasn't done as part of the TIA. It wasn't the TIA that made that determination. It was a staff it was a planning staff analysis in looking at the standard that had to be met. TIAs, traditionally anyway, that I'm familiar with, have basically made an assumption regarding the level of development being proposed, and then they basically examined that and made recommendations as to what would be required in order to mitigate the impacts at that level. There may be other factors that are put into play that end up with a recommendation of reducing the size or intensity of that project, but it doesn't necessarily result from a recommendation from the traffic engineer or the traffic analyst doing a TIA on the project.
I guess if what I'm hearing is that the TIA isn't the place to bring up the issue of possibly phasing a proposed development, then where would that be brought up? Lots of developers.
Phasing is something that can be considered, and the TIA does consider in its analysis.
Does the staff have objection then to adding that to the possible mitigations?
No.
Okay. Is there any objection from commissioners?
I guess, by the way, I just got through reading the thing. So my understanding of this section is that the traffic engineer would have the ability to affect the phasing of the overall project development. That's the authority we're going to give the traffic engineer. So the traffic engineer can affect other aspects of the proposed development, not just traffic-related improvements.
Madam Chair, I read it that the traffic engineer has to agree, but isn't the one who has to propose it.
Actually, it says here that the applicant would pull from this list of mitigation measures and offer what works best.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
It doesn't happen often, but I think an example that staff just reminded, was there's a recent subdivision development in Eagle River, Eagle Crossing development, and there is a condition there placed on only a certain number of units could be built until a certain road connection was made. And so in that sense, it is controlling the phasing of development. It's based, in other words, you can't, as you're noting here, you can't outpace the necessary upgrades. In this instance, a certain number of units were allowed, but beyond that, no further units would be allowed until a certain road connection was made. So that is a form of basically tying your phasing to the necessary improvements.
Okay. Mr. Josephson, you're in the queue.
I didn't mean to be.
You didn't mean to be. Wow, they cleaned out the queue real fast. Okay. What do you want to do?
Madam Chair, I would like the commission to, if there are no objections, include this language.
Okay, is there any objection from the commission?
Yep.
There's objection from Mr. Phelps, so we need to so noted. We will move on. Number 9, Ms. Fees.
Yes, Madam Chair, if Ms. McConnell would take a look at this. I'm not intending to change any intent. I just found that it wasn't clear, dangling something or another there. So
I think Ms. P's language is much better. Thank you.
then to move quickly, I would ask that the commission accept the substitute language, which keeps the same meaning. It's just grammatically different.
Is there any objection from staff with regard to this proposed addition?
No.
I'm seeing them shake their heads no. Any objection from commissioners? I'm not hearing any. So that addition is okay. And now moving on to number 10, Ms. Pease.
Yes. This is, I guess, well, it's similar to the language we just considered in number 6. That's a little different. It's the same idea of mitigation measures, keeping pace with the development. And I guess I didn't think that was explicitly covered in Section 3 on page 35. But Ms. McConnell could maybe tell us if this is already covered somewhere else. I see I'm looking at the issue response. It was staff's position that these mitigations do have to take place before the project gets its stamp of approval, but I was thinking again of something like Legacy Point to beat the same old horse.
I guess I don't see language that particularly talks about the order of the improvements except for the language that you just added in issue 6, which certainly the phasing of the proposed development could be you have to do that intersection upgrade before you can do your development. I mean, that would be a possible condition of the development. So I would view that this language isn't necessary due to the changes we made in number 6.
Okay. Mr. Nelson?
Yes, I would agree with Ms. McConnell. In response to legacy, I don't mean to argue a Legacy Point, but the concern with this is that it seems to be dictating what the traffic engineer's recommendations can be, and we really feel that there ought to be more latitude for the traffic engineer to best determine when improvements have to be made based on the various impacts that the development would cause. In regard to Legacy Point, the reason why there was a lengthy time period before the project could tie into Golden View Drive had to do with the impact of that project would have on Golden View Drive until such time as there was another connection made so that the sole access out of that development wouldn't be just a Golden View Drive. And that the phasing of the development was such that it would have to go down to basically Potter Creek Road and Potter Valley Road and the Seward Highway rather than to Golden View Drive. that has its downside as well, as Ms. Peace has referenced, but to take that one case and use that as a reason to modify the code here, in our judgment, really wouldn't be appropriate.
Madam Chair, does staff feel that they are already able to require off-site upgrades and so forth?
Yes.
Before?
Yes, and in fact, that was an example of a project where that was done is with the new Takatnu Mall. Oilwell Road had to be rebuilt, and lane capacity added, turning lanes added, intersection and signalization added before any of those stores could open. So, it's very typical that whenever there are any off-site impacts that are created by a project, that those impacts have to be addressed before the project can start, or before the project can be put into use.
Okay. Just a minute, Mr. Weddleton's in the queue, Mr. Phelps.
My understanding is that the change on issue 6 was not made because Commissioner Phelps had reservations on that. Is that right?
Correct. But we have the option to vote on it.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Phelps?
Oh, I guess what I was looking at the wording that's proposed here by Ms. Pease is that my understanding was that the intent was to ensure that mitigation measures shall precede use and occupancy of the development, and that's what is being intended by this. In my understanding from what the plan director identified is that there is already pre-existing authority to impose these requirements. Is that correct? What is that authority? Where does the authority exist? Is there a specific reference to that, or is it implicit?
Is your microphone on, Mr. Nelson?
Sorry. What I'm referring to is past practice, current practice.
I guess I'm wondering if it might be useful to have explicit authority identified.
You could.
Which is a little bit different. But oftentimes we have implicit authority that everybody accepts. Sometimes it's useful to have explicit authority specified in code. I don't know if this particular language gets to it, but I think that's something the staff should consider.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Phelps. Are there any further comments on the proposal? Is there any objection to this language?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a proposal to change the language?
Well, my proposal would be for staff to evaluate the issue of the authority they have to approve or disapprove projects or aspects of projects based upon a traffic impact analysis, and if there's a lack of explicit authority, that they identify what that lack is and provide acceptable language to deal with the problem.
Madam Chair, that's okay with me. I don't want to put in something that's already in code somewhere or already explicitly stated. I heard Mr. Phelps refer to traffic impact analysis. And, yep, okay, this is not, okay, yep, that's acceptable.
No, to have it be a hold?
Have it be a hold and ask staff to see whether this authority is explicit anywhere else, and if not, bring it back with tinkering if they need to, so that we can give explicit authority.
All right. Does anyone object to that being a hold item?
Number 10, we're still on, right?
Yes, number 10. Hearing none, that will be a hold. Okay, moving forward. Ms. Pease, number 15.
Okay, so that's on the next page of my handout. I believe this came up somewhere in the subdivision standards, but I thought perhaps it should be included here. This talks about cul-de-sacs, and the current code revision talks about connecting cul-de-sacs at the end of the cul-de-sac. But we do have cul-de-sacs that exceed a quarter mile in length. And it seems that we want pedestrian connections to adjoining streets partway down those cul-de-sacs, if possible. So that's what I've proposed if a cul-de-sac street exceeds a quarter mile in length.
Okay. Does staff have any comments on that?
Well, regular streets can also exceed or be up to a quarter mile in length, and yet this provision isn't proposed for regular streets. So I'm kind of wondering why we would single out cul-de-sac streets.
Good point. I don't know what our standards are for connectivity of regular streets, but I would think you're right. We would want to have pedestrian connectivity, whether we had parallel streets or parallel cul-de-sacs that didn't have cross connections.
We do have block length standards in Chapter 8. I just looked them up. In the Class A zoning districts, which are smaller, R1 through R4 generally, block lengths are to be no less than 300 feet and no greater than 500 feet. So you'd have at least 500 feet, no more than 500 feet between intersections. And then in Class B, which is your, R6, R8, R9, no less than 300 feet, but no greater than 1320, which I believe is a quarter mile.
Okay.
And then your cul-de-sacs are 600 in Class A and 900 in Class B.
Does this sound to me as if, does it sound to other people as if we've, go ahead.
We can't hear you.
So, if I'm understanding, a cul-de-sac can't be a quarter of a mile long.
Did you say can't be?
Cannot be.
Not without a variance.
Right.
Okay. Mr. Weddleton?
Well, maybe you worked around my question. I didn't quite understand. Midpoints of the cul-de-sac. Do you mean midpoints on the street leading to the cul-de-sac? Is that what?
Well, if you had a long cul-de-sac, right now it says you have to connect, if you had a cul-de-sac, you have to connect the head of the cul-de-sac to the next nearest street system. And I was concerned that if you had a really long cul-de-sac, you wouldn't want to just connect the end of it. You'd want to connect it mid-block, but we apparently have standards that in Section 8 that address that.
Okay.
I guess the only question would be, no, I can't think of any other question. The only other comment that I had here under this section, the way it's worded now for cul-de-sac connectivity, it says connect from the end of the cul-de-sac to the sidewalk system of the closest adjacent street. And what if we have a close adjacent street that doesn't have a sidewalk system yet, but someday we hope it will? So I wanted to delete as shown here on my comments, delete the reference to the sidewalk system and just get that connection made, and then hopefully we'll get the sidewalk in on the next go-round.
That's fine.
Okay. Mr. Phelps?
Question for staff. I guess this section of code does not relate to subdivision standards, but I would think that you would pick this issue up during fairly normal or typical subdivision review.
This section is referenced in the subdivision standards.
It is referenced then. Well, my recollection was that you would look at connectivity, but there was no specific requirement on connectivity. Can somebody help me in that aspect of what does the subdivision code actually call for?
Under the Section 2108-030F, it's called streets, and it says all streets shall comply with the standards of this chapter and Section 2107-060, transportation and connectivity, the specifications of the design criteria manual, and the following intent and standards. And then it has a number of other things.
So I didn't hear any explicit standard then.
For connectivity,
Yes.
that's in this Section 060.
So it's coming out of this section here. So subdivision authority is coming actually out of this section here.
That's correct.
Okay.
Then, Madam Chair, I would propose to drop the first part of that language change on cul-de-sacs of a quarter mile length, but to delete from lines 15 to 22, it's line 18, the reference to the sidewalk system of the.
Okay. And what would we be left with?
The sentence would then read, pedestrian access easement shall be provided between each cul-de-sac or street turnaround and the closest adjacent street or pedestrian walkway.
Okay.
So,
Yes. Mr. Josephson?
Commissioner Pease, your proposal is to delete the last sentence of subsection 4.
No, Mike, go up to line 17, 18. I would delete the very last word of 17, which is the, and then sidewalk system of. That's all. So what would happen is if you had a cul-de-sac and you wanted to punch through pedestrian access to the nearest road or walkway, you could punch it through to a road that didn't have a sidewalk yet, because someday, presumably, it would.
Okay.
And just
Go
to
ahead.
clarify, then you would agree that with the staff's recommendation to delete to the extent reasonably feasible, right?
Yes, and I would agree with that.
Okay. Is there any objection to that change? Hearing none. That change is approved. Number 16, Ms. Pease.
Yes, here you can look at page 8 of the issue response. Staff has provided some new language up there at the top of the page to underline, to allow connections to adjacent municipal parks shall be required unless waived by the Director of the Parks and Recreation Department. And I was just focused on that now in municipal parks, because what we're talking about here is making sure that connections are made to undeveloped land. And I was just asking Erica to, or would like to ask Erica to just kind of brainstorm whether there's any other undeveloped land where the public might want access. And it occurred to me that, the state parks, but they said Chugach State Park was already covered, but, maybe we need to put state parks in there. The other thought I had was Coastal Wildlife Refuge. I don't think there's much development going on along the path anymore, new development. I didn't think there's anything else along Potter Marsh either. But then there are also Heritage Land Bank, open spaces, which are not necessarily municipal parks, but could be someday. And I know there's some out in the southeast part of town, and you wouldn't want to foreclose that option.
The reason we specifically called out parks was the fear that somebody would claim that the parks were developed, wasn't it? And that they didn't need to provide a connection, because the section says you have to provide a connection to undeveloped lands.
Right. The problem is undeveloped and intended for future development. And some people say, well, open space is not going to be developed, so we don't need to have any access to it. We came across this at some point in Chugach State Park access issues.
I think with HLB lands, there wouldn't be a presumption of use, and so that would be considered to fit into the undeveloped and intended for future development. But
what about where HLB lands have been, in some land use plan, called out for open space? Are we still okay, or should we just put?
You could add the word where they've been designated. Because, sorry to interrupt, but your point's well taken, and Erica's point's well taken, too, that if there are heritage land bank lands that are considered vacant lands, unencumbered, then it wouldn't be appropriate to include that. But if those lands have gone through a planning process and they've been dedicated, or if they're encumbered as park or open space, then there is a use that's been established with it. It would be appropriate to make the connection.
Sorry to be ignorant about HLB's designations. I've seen HLB plans where they're recommended to be retained for something, but they don't have any official status. It hasn't been acted on.
Then they'd be treated like any other vacant land. It would be presumptuous in that instance to assume what the use of the land would be or where a connection would be appropriate.
I'm feeling kind of muddled on this. Is municipal parks, in your judgment, inclusive enough? Are we creating any problems where somebody says it's not a dedicated park?
Mr. Davis?
If I could follow on what Mr. Nelson said, if there has been a Heritage Land Bank land use study and that study was adopted as an element of the comprehensive plan, for example, some of our studies of Heritage Land Bank lands have, and let's say that study has designated certain HLB lands as parkland, then like Mr. Nelson said, there could be an additional language in the code that says, or lands designated as park in the comprehensive plan, I suppose. If that language were used, that would include any Heritage Land Bank study that's been adopted.
Okay.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I would then propose that staff could provide the exact language for making sure that designated but not dedicated parks would be accessible through this provision.
Is there any objection to adding that? Mr. Josephson, I see you in the queue. Did you have a question or something to add?
Yes, Madam Chair. For Mr. Nelson, you talked about where connections are appropriate, and you sort of implied that connections sometimes aren't appropriate. I'm just trying to think of where that would be so. I know there must be examples. You seem to make a comparison between appropriate and inappropriate connections.
Well, I was making a distinction between Heritage Land Bank lands that have been designated from Heritage Land Bank lands that have not been designated. And for those that have not been designated, they're basically have a similar status as vacant land, for which we don't know what the use would be, and so we wouldn't really know where it would be appropriate to make a connection, whereas if it has been designated, it's been through a planning process, it is under a management authority, and you have a much better ability to determine where the connection would best fit.
Okay. So you mean literally where the trail would go, the trailhead might go, or whatever? Sounds like.
Okay. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Is there any objection to the proposed addition? Hearing none, that has been added. Okay, Ms. Pease, we're now up to number 17.
Let's see, page 9 of the issue response. I'm looking at 17. Let's see, I'm not
It's 8 on the issue response, actually.
Page 8.
Oh, page 8. Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking at this and signs. I think I was questioning the standards for bicycle facilities and wondering whether that shouldn't be referenced. We have standards for, no, actually we don't have standards for parking, but we do have some of the size standards for parking. I guess I don't.
You don't?
Well, it says research on pedestrian safety and convenience standards on my sheet, so I'm thinking I got something a little off here. Let's pass on 17. I'm okay with it.
Okay. All right. And the next one on the list is number 21, Ms. Pease.
Sheet 21.
It's on page 9 of the issue response.
Okay, this, issue 21, I don't have issue 21 I have issue 22.
You have issue 22?
Yeah.
Okay, I had you up for 21 also. Okay, 22.
Oh, you know, I think issue 20. Oh, it was issue 20. I put down issue 17, but it was issue 20 that I had a issue with. That's on page 9. And I was concerned that there should be some kind of reference to specific standards for sidewalks in this plan. And the answer from staff was that we don't specify what goes in the right-of-way. But we do to some extent. This title says that there will be sidewalks on both sides of the road, for example. In the subdivision standards, we talked about width of sidewalks. And so it was my concern that this section should talk about specifically when pedestrian crossings should be installed. And I guess I'd like to hear staff's comments on why it shouldn't be part of Title 21. But here's the problem. We've reviewed a lot of traffic projects where the applicant just didn't see the value in putting in a crossing. I'm thinking in particular of the Elmo Road where Dowling intersects it, and that's obviously going to become a great commuter corridor, north-south, and it's going to have a huge amount of traffic, especially when it connects up with Raspberry. And we didn't have a lot of – we made our comments, and DOT disregarded them. And it seems that there could be more muscle put in our municipal code somewhere that when we have a certain volume of traffic, a certain speed of traffic, when we have children crossing, we're going to put in some kind of a controlled crossing. And it's a lot to get into figuring out the details here. That's why I was hoping staff would take this as an opportunity to give us some language to consider. And I still am hoping that. So I would like the Commission's permission to ask them to do that.
Ms. McConnell?
I personally feel very uncomfortable writing standards for crossings. I mean, I believe engineers look at a lot of different factors in deciding where it's appropriate, and I would want to be talking to the traffic engineers before writing such code. So, I mean, we can take the time to do that, but it'll take some more research.
Yeah, I would just add, we have a standard when we know we're going to get a traffic impact analysis. It's 140 units. We don't have anything that compels analysis of whether there should be a controlled crossing, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Because I think as our traffic builds on our streets, if we're going to have a pedestrian-friendly town, we've got to have some triggers that say, yep, we're at the stage where we need pedestrian crossings here.
I think that it probably makes sense to ask the question of the traffic engineering department as to whether or not a specific standard or trigger can be identified. I think that's appropriate to ask them. I don't know what the answer truly is, but to ask the question seems to be appropriate.
Perhaps this should be a hold item, Ms. Pease.
Yes, I would suggest that, like Mr. Phelps' suggestion, that we ask traffic and staff to try to identify triggers for when pedestrian crossings should be considered.
It might have been beneficial to have someone from traffic here this evening, if we might have been able to get some answers. Okay.
I had a question. Now, were we on issue 22 or 23?
20.
Now.
20.
And then, Mr. Josephson, did you have something to add that you'd like them to address when this comes back?
Just to clarify, anyone there at the department, is there no standard on when a crossing should go in? Is it just an ad hoc thing that's case by case?
I don't know. There might be standards in the design criteria manual. I mean, like I said, Title 21 doesn't really deal much with road design, so there might be standards that I'm unaware of.
Okay.
There are national standards and national publications, but they may not be applicable to the local circumstance, and so that's why you have to ask the question of the local traffic engineer.
Okay.
All right, now we're at 22, Ms. Pease.
Yes, issue 22. This is the page, let's see, what page are we on? E2C. We are on page 38, and top of the page, line 4. This requires sidewalks in the Class A district in R4, R4A, mixed use and commercial, when there's 125 feet of frontage. And I would like to delete the minimum 125 feet of frontage, because otherwise we're going to get sidewalks installed piecemeal with gaps, and I think discontinuous pedestrian sidewalks are highly dangerous. We're aiming for contiguity, contiguousness. So staff maybe could speak to that, why we would have it worded as you do.
I think no matter what we put in here, we're going to get discontinuous pieces of sidewalk, because one property on the street may redevelop and the others may not. And so we'll have one chunk of sidewalk and not others. To be honest, there was some I'm sure it was a very intelligent reason why we picked 125 feet, and I can't remember what it was. We really struggled with how do we get, in areas that didn't get pedestrian facility or sidewalks when they were developed, what areas do sidewalks become a priority? And we decided our high-density areas, so particularly the R4 and the R4A and our commercial areas. And how do we get those when local streets are not often rebuilt or redone in the way that collectors and arterials are, or those are much more frequently. So I'm sorry, I can't remember why we had 125 feet.
Mr. Frederick?
I just want to make sure I'm clear here, but isn't the objective in setting some kind of a minimum length was that so you don't have 50-foot chunks of sidewalk? You know, I'm thinking of Mountain View where we build infill all the time, and we may be building one lot or two lots side by side, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense on a street that doesn't have sidewalks to build 50 or 100 feet of sidewalk in the middle of a 300-foot long block.
Sure, we just end up with 125-foot chunks of sidewalk.
I'm following what you were after there was to get some kind of length that made some sort of sense in the real world, rather than say sidewalks have to be built whenever something's built in this zoning district, right?
Right.
Okay. I mean, I have enough problem with 125 feet because I still see that as an issue where you have half a block of sidewalk and half a block of no sidewalk, and then what happens in the next block, who knows? But right.
Is it possible to put in an intent statement as opposed to a dimension statement? For example, where existing sidewalks where sidewalks exist or are planned, you would then activate this requirement. So it would be different than a length requirement. It would be more a performance requirement.
I'm not sure how that trigger would work, because normally sidewalks would be built along with the road improvements during a subdivision. And so once you're beyond this, with something like that, would you interpret that if they're intended to be there? I mean, I'm not sure how you would interpret it that, because you could say, well, we want sidewalks everywhere, so they're intended there, so thus you always have to put them in, or you could say it's...
Well, I think I'm not as familiar with this now as I used to be, but if you had a subdivision, you'd obviously require the sidewalk.
Yes.
That's straightforward. If you had a street improvement, obviously require the sidewalk to be part of the overall design, be it a collector or arterial. And so what we're talking about are those instances that don't relate to a subdivision, that do not relate to a highway or a street improvement. I'm not exactly sure what those are, but that's where this issue comes up. And I think to get an answer to this issue, you'd have to look at those particular particular cases to then find out what makes sense in terms of wording to require a sidewalk under particular situations or conditions. I just can't recall exactly what that situation is, where you don't have a subdivision, where you don't have a street improvement.
Well, our thinking was, okay, we find this most important in our high-density areas. If a lot, so if there's a vacant lot that is now developing with presumably multifamily housing, or a lot that is redeveloping, that would trigger this. So there's no subdivision involved, but there is development. And I guess, my guess, and again, I'm sorry, I don't remember, but was that if there was 125 feet of frontage, it was going to be a large enough project where putting in the sidewalk would be important to the project and significant to the area. So I think that was why we narrowed it to that particular situation.
Ms. Pease?
Madam Chair, it's really hard to think of an example, and the best I can come up with is International Airport Road, where I don't even think sidewalks are required on the south side of the street. But if everyone can picture the block of International Airport Road that has Bailey's Furniture on the corner and then extends down to Arctic. So Bailey's Furniture is a big development. No, there are no sidewalks. I don't think they're required there. But say this were a commercial strip that had developed without sidewalks, and now we're going back in. Bailey's Furniture is more than 125 feet, so it would have to have a sidewalk. Then you get to a bunch of little businesses, including the Rilke-Schule German School. It would be great if those Rilke-Schule German School kids had a sidewalk on that street, but because that next set of lots is all small, you wouldn't have any pieces of sidewalk being added in bit by bit as those lots redevelop. And so if you want contiguity, if the sidewalk's not just for that property, but to get people from that property onto the next intersection, you need to require that as redevelopment occurs, each parcel, regardless of frontage, builds its little piece.
Yeah.
And again, I don't think that side of International is required, but that's an example of a street built without them, and you could add them in piecemeal, but you don't want to add just gaps of it.
And I think on streets that have, been designated as transit corridors, it should be mandatory without regard to the size of the lot. We can't expect people to walk to bus stops in snow up to their knees when there's no safe passage along the roadways. I can't do it. I can do it in the summertime, but I can't do it in the wintertime. And there's a lot of redevelopment going on some of our major streets, and there's not necessarily always sidewalks or trails being put in. And I think it's something we can think, need to think about. What would you like to do, Ms. Pease?
Well, my original proposal was to delete the 125-foot frontage requirement so that these zoning uses would be required to build sidewalks. If there is some problem that staff foresees with that, or if they would like to find an example to illustrate why that's important or not important, I would put it on hold.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I would just mention, I think what Mr. Frederick alluded to earlier is that this could put a burden on, we still have single-family homes in R4, and this could have put a burden on, someone like me, just someone who owns a house on a lot. Just something to consider.
This would be for development or new development, though. So if you have a house there, you don't have to put in your section. But if you tear it down, you put up something else, then you got to build it.
Mr. Wang?
Well, I like the idea of having sidewalks everywhere, but, if we take out any length requirement, then we do run the risk of this piecemeal creation of sidewalks and making people build sidewalks that don't connect to anything. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I feel kind of silly making people build stranded sidewalks, too. So I don't know what's the best way to crack the nut, so to speak. because I just hesitate to make people do something that looks like a kind of futile gesture.
Yes. It's tough. Mr. Josephson?
Does the staff know what the cost of putting in sidewalk over a, 50 feet is?
No.
It seems like that would be an important thing to know.
Mr. Phillips?
Yeah, I guess my feeling is that this is actually getting to a pretty significant issue, and I'm reluctant to take any type of action, including not doing anything, until we have a bit more of an analysis by staff on this. I can see a very strong argument for requiring all development in these zoning districts when they're developed or redeveloped to put the sidewalk in, because you need to have that continuity. At the same time, to use Mr. Wang's statement or description, I don't want to be silly either, but I don't necessarily want to take any action this evening without having staff looking at it a bit further to see if they can come up with an explanation for the 125 feet, or they can come up with a more satisfactory statement of requirement.
Ms. Pease, how about another hold?
Yeah, that'll be fine. And I guess it might be helpful for people to see if there's a street that this is particularly applicable on that has mixed frontages, whether we end up with stranded sidewalks with this requirement or whether we end up with stranded sidewalks without this requirement. Because I think we end up with stranded sidewalks with this requirement.
Okay. We're going to give Ms. Pease a rest. It's Mr. Weddleton's turn for number 23.
Well, actually, on 23, we already discussed the basic issue when we talked about number 20.
Okay.
So we could, I would just, I think we put that on hold, or?
Put that on hold. Is there any objection? Well, just hearing none, that gets put on hold. All right. And Mr. Weddleton, you also have 28.
On page 37, lines 5 to 8, I'd like to see the addition of words where there's a trail designated but not yet built. We'll put signs that trail will be constructed later. And that parallels what was done for future road connections in the previous section.
Does staff have a comment on that?
I'm sorry, are we on issue 28?
Yes.
28.
About deleting the provision on page 39?
Well,
I have 39 lines. 29.
Mr. Weddleton said page 37.
Yes, Mr. Weddleton said 37. I have to get Mr. Weddleton's remarks here.
I thought Mr.
no,
Weddleton's
actually,
concern came up in a different issue.
I'm sorry, that page 37 is where it refers to the, what you do with an incomplete road. And if there's an incomplete road, a sign goes up that says future road connection. And what I'm looking for is something similar for trails. So that if there's a subdivision builds a trail, but it ends at the next undeveloped area, there's a sign that says this will be a trail.
Did you follow that, Ms. McConnell?
Yes.
Do you have any objection to that?
I guess I'm not sure how they'll know that the trail will continue, which kind of begs the question how they know the road would also continue.
I think when they...
But a future connection is planned or accommodated.
I think one example that was dealt with before was when a trail or easement would go into Chukat State Park but would be undeveloped. I know there was a discussion on putting a sign there and saying this will be a future possibly developed entrance to Chukat State Park. think that was in the subdivision design section. So and this parallels that thinking.
Mr. Wang and then Mr. Phelps.
I guess to Mr. Weddleton, I just wonder what purpose that serves. I mean, I can imagine it serving as a great source of frustration to people who show up and you're like, trail when? I mean, I think it's going to, I mean, I don't understand what's being accomplished.
Kind of thinking back to discussions that were when the subdivision design was done, and we're thinking about connection with Tree State Park, and what happens is when you've got a lot and you've got a pretty much undeveloped, unflagged easement for a trail, you can't tell where that begins and your property line ends, and you start treating that like it's your lawn. So you want to have some kind of sign saying this is a future trail. And so people moving in know that this will be a public access trail at some point. It could be 10, 15 years down the road, and then when all of a sudden the money's there to put a trail in, they're squawking.
I guess, I mean, I think that's going to be a source of frustration. I mean, maybe there's some other way to alert. I mean, is this for the landowners, or is this, I mean, if I'm a member of the public and I'm tromping along and I see future trail, that indicates some intent to me, and
Madam Chair?
Yes. Who's talking? Oh,
if I could chime in.
Mr. Phelps is next.
Yeah, I would just suggest that perhaps we can refer this to the, I guess it'd be called the non-motorized trail coordinator. Certainly they've dealt with this issue before about the need or the reasonability of identifying by signage new trails. I think there's probably going to be a cost implication to this as well as liability implications. And I think that probably would be well served to get some feedback from the non-motorized trail coordinator before we take action on this.
Sounds like a good suggestion. Ms.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think I understand what Mr. Weddleton is trying to avoid, and that is possibly in part public opposition because they claim to be unaware that there was going to be development on their property line or public traffic on their property line. We saw this in the Powder Ridge subdivision not too long ago where there was some road easement, big one, wide one, 150 or 200 feet, and lots of homes backed up to it, and half a dozen people or more came in and said, oh, I thought that was greenbelt and never going to be developed. And we hear this, it creates another hurdle for actually getting things done if people can make that claim.
Well, I think that happens all the time everywhere, and even if you, to use an example of a school site, if you select a school site 15 years in the future and residential development occurs around it and everybody knows when they buy the house that there's going to be a school site there, everybody's surprised when they actually want to build the school.
When the
this is very, very typical. I don't think we're going to avoid that type of situation, but I still think that there's a question about, and perhaps this is useful, we just need to get, I think, additional information from the municipality as to how to proceed on this.
Okay. Is there any objection to putting this on hold to get comments from the Trails Coordinator? Hearing none. That one's on a hold also. I'll just add a comment here. One of the things about if notifying the public of something like a potential trail, even if it's in a plan, if there's no funding for it, or it becomes the public expectation it's going to happen, then there's that expectation, but it may never occur, or plans could get changed and it could get eliminated, and then people aren't aware of it because they don't go to hearings, or they don't, aren't aware of it, and they might have some concerns. But it's just an ongoing dilemma, because if people look at the plats around them and stuff and things and look at their title reports, they'll generally know what's dedicated out there and where those easements and rights of way are, even if, that they may not understand them. Okay, moving on. Oh, my goodness, I turned a page and there's nothing on that page.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could we take a quick break?
Oh, I suppose so. We'll be, Nancy, you're going to be up next with number 32.
32.
We're getting close to the halfway point, and then we'll go through all the things that aren't on the lists. Well, I don't know. Did you have 20? Yeah. He pulled it. No, I don't have anything on this 30 or 31. No, no. Blank with nothing to, as far as, it's got to be done.
Must be the lady person when it comes to I know that these things would be assembly. We never seen. I guess what I'm wondering is it imperative that we go all the way until the clock strikes midnight?
I don't know.
I like.
It'd be nice.
That's a good thing. That's a good sign.
Well, it depends on how many questions get asked and how quickly we can go through it. We'll try to go through it. I'll try to move things along a little quicker.
Oh, you're.
I will try to be faster. Oh, I have to stand up.
We're getting home early. Did I hear early?
Well, you need to go home early tonight. I feel like I need to go home early tonight. We're going to go home. We're going to go home at 9 o'clock. So whatever we get done at 9 o'clock. Now, I just made an executive. And gentlemen, if you want to go home at 9 o'clock, you need to get in your chairs. Yes, that's right. Look at us sprint. Yes, look at how lively we are. Well, you know what? We're doing really good work, and we've done 6 hours of brain work already. So I've declared we're going home at 9 o'clock. This is what's called an executive decision, okay? And I will expect a motion to adjourn. Well, we'll come out of the committee of the whole, and then we'll adjourn. So whatever business we can get done, I've cleared this with staff. There's not a problem with us continuing this. So let's go. And Ms. Pease, we're on number 32.
32, I think we kind of already
did that.
covered this with crossing, so we're okay on that one.
Done. Okay.
And then I'm going to skip 34.
Okay, skip. Okay.
And that brings us to 43 on my list. That was
Well, just a minute.
Mr.
I have to
Weddleton's.
make sure that Mr. Weddleton doesn't have any in the middle. Okay, you're 43.
Okay, this is really easy. It's on the reference to the center line. The bus transit stop shouldn't be any closer than 3 feet of the center line of the tree, and I just wanted Erica to see if there's some other term for landscapers, because I'm not sure what the center line of a tree is. I think it's the trunk.
I'll check on that. I don't know off the top of my head.
So if you'll just check on that and make the correct, I don't have any problem with the distance, I just thought it was not super accurate.
Okay. And Mr. Weddleton, number 45.
I have 45.
57.
You had what?
She has
Ms. Pease. Oh, it says Ms. Pease. Sorry. I can't read my own writing.
All right.
I'm too excited.
On page 45 of the, this is neighborhood protection standards, and it's a list of what neighborhood protection standards should be considered, and with number 4, the last line, page 45, line 39, it says location and screening of loading and delivery areas. I thought fleet garage and vehicle maintenance areas should also be considered their location and screening, because both of them involve less sort of active vehicle use, but they're just a big visual impact, and with vehicle maintenance, it can be a noise impact.
Does staff have any objections to that?
No, I just point out this isn't meant to be an inclusive list. I mean, the decision-making body is allowed to look at other things. This is just kind of a list of some of the things, but no, we don't object.
Okay. Any objections by other commissioners? None. Okay.
Okay. There are 3 parts to this.
Okay.
Also, adding to this list, and I understand it's not totally comprehensive, but the idea of visual protection, I wondered if the staff or the commission wanted to consider the really most obvious kinds of signs, and in particular I was thinking of changeable type and illuminated signs. You can kind of tune out, especially after dark, a pole sign or a other sign, but those in particular are designed to grab the visual attention.
We don't object to that.
You don't have any objection? Any objection by commissioners? Okay, don't hear any, so that's okay.
And then the other is a little bit of a bigger change. If you look at the issues response, I said page 45, but that's not right. If you look under issue 45, on page 19 of the issues response, there was a paragraph here which tries to get at those neighborhood protection for the really big developments that could go into neighborhood areas. And staff responded that they're going to look at this in section 5. And I'm hesitant, or considering where should it go. If you're a citizen using this code and you want to know what your neighborhood protections are, it seems you're going to come looking here. And so that's the question.
Staff, Ms. McConnell?
We didn't say we would look at this in Section 5. We were referencing an issue response from Chapter 5 where the whole issue of large non-residential developments in residential districts came up, and we had a large discussion about that. And what we committed to do was exploring a section specifically about, in the same way that we have a section for large commercial developments for big boxes, we would explore having a section for large non-residential developments in residential areas, which would be here in Chapter 7. And I think it would go later on in the chapter, not right under this section. So we haven't, it's not in this section of the issue response, but that was what we were referring to, that we did commit to exploring these issues in a discrete section, which, of course, we will bring to you.
And would it be redundant in staff's opinion to have, I don't know what you're working on, so I don't know whether these concerns are going to be addressed when you look again at.
It would be attempting to address all these concerns, sufficient buffering, whether they're needed, what the open space needs would be, whether there were different, different height standards, different setbacks, different lot coverage. I mean, we would try to look at some of the existing problems that have arisen and see what was appropriate for the types of large developments that can end up in residential neighborhoods.
Okay, then the concern I have, I guess, is I don't know what size you're talking about, so when will that kick in? And should any of this be applicable under the neighborhood protection section for smaller, well, I know we're trying to hurry here. Let's see.
Ms. Pease, perhaps if you don't agree with what we came up with, we can come back and revisit this section then?
Yeah, I guess that's what we should do, and then I'll think about it a little more.
Okay, so put a hold on
that
number
one.
3.
That's probably the way to keep it moving.
All right. Number 46, Ms. Pease.
Okay, so we agreed on two parts of that under issue 45.
Right.
Okay. This is referring to, I think, a statement of purpose on page 63, line 20. So it's the statement of purpose for off-street parking and loading. And these were just some word changes to the item number 6, which is on lines 19 and 20. It says, support a balanced transportation system. And to me, it could be implying that it's currently balanced. And I'm not sure that I would agree that we have a balanced transportation system. So I thought it would be better to say achieve a balanced transportation system. And I'm reading from my my notes, so the wording is there. Achieve a balanced transportation system. And then I'm not sure what it means. Is consistent with clearer air and water. So I think it should say protects and improves water and air quality. The word protect, the word improve is also used on page 73 of this section. So I was kind of mirroring that language. And then add the word promote efficient infill and redevelopment, just to make it read actively.
Sorry, I'm a little confused. Are we on issue 46?
We're on issue 46.
Which is in section 070.
070. Oh,
090.
okay. I got way off base then. Sorry. Somehow I got my numbers wrong. I don't have any problem with, I see what I did. I don't have any problem with section 36. I just, right after that section, chose to put in a new issue. So I don't have any problem with section 36. I mean, with issue 46.
Okay. So no problem with that one.
Well, so how do we address that, your rewording then?
I suppose it goes into the new category unless you want to deal with it now. I have a couple new ones and you have a couple new ones.
So we can just save it to the end.
Right.
Just make a note of it so you'll be sure to address it
Okay.
at our next meeting when we get to the end. Okay, number 47, Ms. Pease.
Number 47, now are we in parking?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now we're in parking. This is page 65. It's the section, top of page C, areas that count toward minimum but not maximum parking requirements. And I thought we should have motorcycle and motor scooter parking.
Is there any objection to that?
If staff wants to think about it further, I would understand. I just, at the last minute, got some standards. Motorcycle parking's usually 4 feet wide instead of 8 feet wide. But we hear something that's some people are turning to as an alternative to cars.
Does staff want to think about that? Mr. Davis?
Yes, please.
Okay, we can just put that one on hold. I guess Mr. Wang doesn't have a comment right now. We'll just put that one on hold, Ms. Pease.
Okay.
Okay. So that was 47. 49, Ms. Pease.
49 is really a question for staff. This is on page, I said 96. Yeah, I think that's correct. It's the question of trying to encourage lower floor use of parking garages. And I just wondered if you have 3 floors that only have a 25% of the facade with visibility to the outside, are you achieving have you modeled that? Have you seen what that looks like? I guess it's a question for staff, so it's not really a change I'm suggesting at this point.
Mr. Davis?
If basically if the second and third floor actually have an active use for whether it's commercial or residential, where it's actually people are there are windows, then it's a great improvement over the alternative, which is to have parking stalls facing the street. Basically, those first several stories above the ground floor are an important part of the street environment, and to the extent that there is an active use which does have windows, whether 25% is the magic number. We believe that it would provide a lot of windows, and we can provide examples of where we tested facades for that amount of windows. But we think that even in active use, that amount of windows would be a huge improvement over the alternative, which is simply the more parking stalls.
Okay, sounds as if you've analyzed it and you came up with that figure somehow, scientifically or systematically, so I'm okay with it as it is.
Okay. And we move on to 51, Ms. Pease.
Let's see, 51, let's go back a bit to page 81. I think this has to do with... Staff had some changes on this, mini and compact cars, so I just have to flip to their language too. This is probably one that might need some discussion to get a handle on it. Staff has said they don't want to have so-called compact spaces. They're just going to have tight spaces if cars are not going to be continuously pulled in and out of them. And my opinion was that we're missing a chance to try to induce people to have smaller cars. And I wonder whether there aren't solutions that other cities have found to put in small stalls that only small cars can use, that can't be misused by drivers in larger cars. So I guess I was not ready to give up on having small stalls to attract small cars. And I said I'd like to put this on hold, because surely other cities have successfully done something. And I was hoping that staff could see if there weren't some design alternatives to make small car stalls work for small cars.
Like in some parking garages or lots, they'll say compact car only.
Right, and the staff said, well, big cars just straddle the yellow line. But if you have pillars, support pillars, so that a big car can't wedge in there, or if you put your small car stall right next to the planter, that kind of thing, it seems to me that you could have small car stalls.
Yeah, and if you give them tickets, the big cars tickets, they don't like that very much. Do you want to put a hold on that?
Yeah, I would. I have a little bit of information. I could probably get more on what other cities do.
Okay. Mr. Wang?
I don't know, I'm just feeling curmudgeonly, so I guess my universal experience, every compact car stall I have ever seen in the city of Anchorage is filled with a 4-door, 26-foot-long pickup truck. And I just don't know how you're going to have to give people the Vulcan mind meld to get out of that mentality in this town. So, and I love small cars, and I would like to encourage people to drive them. And I drive a small car, and I'm constantly agitated by the misuse of small parking spaces. So I don't know how feasible that is.
Well, I won't tell you what my solution is on the record. There are advantages to being a small person, being able to park very close next to them, and where I can get out of my car, but it's a little difficult for them to get into theirs sometimes. I like my small car, too. Okay, so I guess we're putting a hold on number 51. 52.
Let's see, 52, I guess this refers back to the statement of purpose, way back on page 63. I don't know why it came up under 52. Oh, yeah, encourage the choice of non-vehicular modes. Is that right? 50, page 50, 63. Parking is a powerful, let's see, I lost my place. What number are we on again? 62.
52.
52. Okay. This preamble, lines 2, 3 through 7, sort of spells out some of what you can achieve through parking policy. And once again, I wanted to tie it to the land use. Transportation and land use always have a mutual influence, and I wanted to add the words at the end of this sentence on 7, and to achieve a compact, efficient, high-value land use pattern, which is consistent, of course, with our Comp 2020 plan. So the sentence would read, it is also the intent of this section to attenuate the adverse visual, environmental, and economic impacts of parking areas, comma, and to achieve a compact, efficient, high-value land use pattern.
Does staff have a reaction to that proposal?
In general, I don't think we have an objection.
Okay.
I think it might fit better in the first sentence than in the second sentence, but if we could massage it a little.
That would be fine with me.
Any of Mr. Phelps?
Actually, I don't have a real concern about this, but the words compact and efficient make sense to me, but high-value land use pattern, I'm not sure what high-value land use pattern is, and so I prefer that we delete the words high-value and just keep compact and efficient land use patterns.
I guess that's okay.
Is there any objection to the proposal, including Mr. Phelps' suggestions? Hearing none, that is okay as modified. Let's see, maybe we have time for one or two more if they're quick. This may not be quick. 57, Ms. Pease and Mr. Weddleton both had
Yeah, mine was more a note to staff, and just to see if so basically when they look at the allocations of vehicles or parking spaces for schools, to consider that high schools don't necessarily need to have as much surface parking for students as we have been giving them. We're trying to encourage riding and walking, so just editorial comment that student driving ought to be a privilege, not a necessity.
or a birthright. Mr. Weddleton.
No, I don't really have a recommended change so much, I suppose, but reading the comments that sounded like they were from the school district, the chart of required parking may work for things we have a lot of experience with, like retail and so on, but every school seems like would be a lot different, and instead of having their parking requirement a chart, maybe any big establishment like a school or stadium or something, if they have to do a traffic impact analysis anyway, maybe the parking requirement would be part of that. So instead of having it in the chart, it would just be part of the development study they would do.
Mr. Davis, were you going to offer a comment?
Yes. I think for certain uses, I think that would be very useful. The schools, we're taking a look at the school requirement that's proposed in response to the school district's comment. In general, for a typical major site plan review, type review, or a traffic impact analysis, it's often the case that the use is simply larger and that we do have a pretty good handle on what the parking demand will be. And so it may not be necessary to go to a parking study every time there's a large review. In a lot of cases, the large review's real purpose is to look at other aspects of the design than parking demand. We may, in a lot of those cases, already know per unit floor area or whatever unit of measure. We may already have a pretty good idea of what the parking demand is, and that will be reflected in the table. For any use that comes forward, there is in the draft code the opportunity to propose or bring forward a parking demand study which they can use to demonstrate that the parking requirement in the table is too high, or that the maximum number of allowed spaces is too low. And I know you had comments about the parking demand study. What is it? Those opportunities are there in the draft code elsewhere. For any use that we're not sure of it's so case by case. We've tended to, in the table, to simply refer to a paragraph that follows the table being the table of all the parking requirements, rather than give a specific number for the use. These unique case-by-case uses, the parking requirement is simply to refer to that paragraph that follows the table, which is, again, basically to do basically that kind of parking demand study.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Are both of you happy with it? Okay. Well, it's about 9 o'clock, so this would be a good place for us to just kind of leave off. At our next meeting, we'll start with issue 59. I'm writing the start there. We need to come out of the committee of the whole, and then I have a couple of administrative things I need to deal with before we go home.
I move that we move out of the committee of the whole.
Second.
Okay, any objection? We're out of the committee of the whole. Mr. Nelson, I see you in the queue.
Thank you. Before you turn, I just wanted to make an announcement that we have a meeting scheduled for this Thursday at noon. And
Yes.
the primary, just as a reminder, the primary topic from our previous meeting was to have Lance Wilbur come and talk about the role of the official streets and highways plan vis-a-vis the long-range transportation plan, because of some of the recommendations they're making regarding classification.
And hopefully Lance will have made it back from moose hunting.
That is our assumption.
Okay. Another thing that's coming up, my colleagues, is we've received a request to have yet another special meeting in the last week of October, either on October 28th, 29th, or 30th. That's a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday nights, and it will be a joint meeting with the Anchorage School Board for a school site selection hearing regarding a new Southwest Anchorage Middle School. And we need to accommodate the school board with their schedules. They can't do it on Monday night because they're having a meeting on Monday night. So if you will, I'm going to ask the staff to circulate an email and let us know which of those nights would work best. We'll try to find a consensus where we at least have a quorum for one of those nights. And the school district, traditionally the school district has made the arrangements. We usually go to the school board and meet in their chambers, and we have our secretary and their secretary, and we do hear the hearing together, and then we take our actions separately, with us taking our action first and them taking their action separate. And I'm going to make a request of our staffing folks. I've already told Margaret that it would be helpful to have the school district demographer available so we can have access to that information. But I would like to have someone from traffic at that meeting. So if we have questions about traffic, and also someone that can answer questions about things like soil conditions, groundwater, and any environmental type questions that we may have. I don't want just planning staff and school district administrative staff there. We're going to need people that can answer substantive questions, and that will avoid a delay, I'm sure. or a postponement, because they're in a, want to get this decision made. I hope that's not an unreasonable request, Mr. Nelson.
No, we'll go ahead and pass it on.
Okay, and, whoever traffic feels like they would like to send. Yes, Ms. Pease?
Madam Chair, since we're trying to design our school facilities as community facilities and make maximum use of them for recreation and culture, if the Parks Department could be sure to have reviewed any alternative sites or given any comments, I'd like to see those. I don't know that we need somebody at the meeting, but if we're looking at alternative sites, I'd definitely like to know how they feel the sites tie in or serve the community.
I might add, the reason this site selection is coming about is that you may recall that there was a site selection done for middle school a few years ago. They're not successful in being able to acquire the site that was selected by the Assembly. They've received a proposal from another property owner to consider a middle school site. Basically, it would be abutting the site that was selected for an elementary school. And so what you're really looking at here is one particular site that's being evaluated.
Okay.
Okay. I would encourage you to save your materials from tonight, and I'm going to scoop up some of this stuff for Mr. Isham. Ms. McConnell, will you make sure that Mr. Isham and Mr. Earnhardt receive all of the handouts that were at the meeting tonight? So
Yes,
that
I will.
have it? And when do you think we'll be dealing with this again?
October 13th, I believe?
Yes, it's the second meeting in October.
A planning night, okay? And on planning nights, I really just want to, I'm working toward keeping those planning nights like we did back in the day.
And like we did tonight.
Yes, and it's wonderful when we don't have to, when we can just deal with planning things. A motion to adjourn would be in order unless commissioners have any comments. Or the planning director has any others.
Move to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any objection? Hearing none, we're adjourned.
Piece of information, I would ask you to hang on to your materials. Oh, yes. Thank you.